a foundation should be a pioneering institution rather than a regular source of support for tried and established activities. Its capital is venture capital. This is 1952. He's already referring to it as venture capital. And it should be used adventurously. Indeed, its business is to take risks. Its primary obligation is to blaze trails, to find new methods, to explore new ideas, to keep its work, in John Dewey's phrase, close to the growing edge of things, end quote. Yet for all our professed admiration for foundations and nonprofits that take risks, we've long behaved as if those risks can be taken without mishap. The literature of philanthropy is full of cheery and glowing reports of grantee successes, indeed so full that one can only be amazed that our national problems stubbornly linger, but somehow we never hear about the mistakes that are built into the very definition of risk, as opposed to what Fosdick described as tried and established activities. It's therefore very much to the credit of Bob Giloth, Vice President of the Center for Family Economic Assistance at Baltimore's Annie E. Casey Foundation, that he undertook to collect some stories about mistakes he and some of his colleagues have made and from which they have learned in their various programs.
Focusing primarily on success can be misleading. There's a mistakes guru, engineer, you may have heard of, Henry Petrosky, who's written quite a bit on this subject, and he, let me quote him, things that succeed teach us little beyond the fact that they have been successful. Things that fail provide incontrovertible evidence that the limits of design have been exceeded. Emulating success risks failure. Studying failure increases our chances of success. And I think that's kind of the story or the motivation for the book. Now, as someone who has had a strong practitioner background in community development, I've always found my mistakes more motivating than my successes. And I realize this may be a distorted part of my temperament, but I found it also to be true of a lot of other practitioners. We kind of ponder what we didn't get right, what assumptions in retrospect seem to just be absolutely wrong-headed. We also are embarrassed when things don't, maybe even shamed a little bit when we use a public, private, philanthropic resource and we don't get it right. We're motivated to sort of figure out a better way of doing it.
And I also use this example because I think it really relates a lot to what I read when I read the book, which is that micro matters. And we often forget about that, especially when we're talking about things at scale. It's that those very small details and the ability to have the organizations that we are a part of have the culture to focus on those details incessantly and constantly be learning from them and have the feedback loops within the organization to learn from them really, really well. And it certainly came out and was a central feature of all of the stories that I read throughout the book was that notion of micro-innovation and micro-failure and the culture within these organizations that allows you to use that micro-failure and make it into something more useful.
So the premise that foundations and their grantees don't share their failures enough, or either with each other, between grantees and foundations, or with the public, in ways that could really help us improve our approaches to whatever social good we're trying to achieve, is definitely true. And I've already heard it said up here, we lack a culture of acceptance of mistakes. And we don't really have safe mechanisms to do it, right? So you know, nonprofits are pressured to raise money. They have multiple funders. So if we admit something didn't work, will the money disappear? Or will the funder give us space to learn, to modify, and to reapply for the funding again? We're working off you know, yearly 1 to 3 year grants. Will the money be there the next time if we actually admit to some failure?
And the last one, and I was fascinated by the incentive question, because the respondents I had said, the other problem is the foundation business model itself. And what's the incentive for foundations to learn from and avoid mistakes? One of the grant makers said that the problem is that in our society, in the for-profit sector, organizations learn and try to learn from mistakes in order to be competitive. I mean, you're trying to basically make sure that your products stay ahead of the game and so forth. What's the incentive for competition in foundations that have no competitive incentive, have no base market measure? What presses 100,000 grant-making foundations not the self-critical, self-analytical Caseys of the world, but what presses philanthropy to be digging into the process of learning. The business model of foundations is at its core, spending this 5% minimum distribution that's required, and making sure it does so and has a return on its investment so it doesn't dig too much into its corpus. So it's, you may have a Bob Giloth or somebody there who's basically pushing this kind of culture, but the business model is problematic.